In the last episode, I began outlining a game that I've been working on. I talked about the origins, the story, the setting, generally conceptual parts of the game. So in this episode, I'm going to try and go more into the actual gameplay. I struggled quite a long time deciding on what the gameplay was actually going to be. To be honest, even now I'm not 100%. But in the beginning, all I had was it was going to be a first-person game. And I went in with the assumption that there would be some kind of combat. So my head went straight to, the usual FPS with some melee elements. And I went down this road testing it for a little while. I have some footage of some old FPS tests. None of it was actually programmed by me. It was just other blueprints that I downloaded and that I tried to Frankenstein to suit my project. But at some point I realised that it's hard to make a game, and making an entire in-depth FPS game would require me to go down a whole new route and essentially probably take up all of the time that I would be spending on this. There was even a brief period when I considered making it an on-rails shooter, which, if you don't know, is an old arcade style of game with an automated camera, and you essentially just shoot everyone you can see. Yeah, it would have made no sense to make a game like this, and you need to use your mouse instead of an actual gun. It just would make no sense whatsoever. And from another aspect, there are so many shooting games out there that I didn't want to turn my game into another one of those. Also, when I imagine the market for an FPS game, I don't really imagine the same kind of person playing this game. But above all, the thing I kept going back to, I wanted this to be an atmospheric game that you could explore. And as the project went on, the story leaned more towards dystopia. So the idea of scarcity, hunger, helplessness. And whereas lots of dystopias I feel go with almost everyone having guns, I thought it would serve the story better and the gameplay and the developer if there were almost no such thing as guns. And in the slums that you live in, people use their hands and melee weapons to inflict harm on other people. There was even one level when I had a car you could drive, which is just a whole other direction you don't want to go in. I think ultimately I wanted it to be like Deus Ex, and later on Cyberpunk actually released while I was working on this, so I'm sure I took inspiration from that too. So I think I was seeing this combination of gunplay and melee, but you need to know what to cut and when to cut. I mean, I say that, this whole project is still probably way too big for me, but any way I can streamline it I feel like is a good thing. After this, I did look into the idea of an immersive sim, and I wondered if this could go along that kind of trajectory. But on the issue of combat, I decided that there would only be melee combat, and this would be in the form of hand-to-hand combat, grappling, weapons, and at various stages I was inspired by different games that I had played in the past. I've always loved the melee system in Bully. I've always loved the ragdoll in Grand Theft Auto 4. And at the time I was playing a game called Sifu, which has some great combinations. It makes you feel awesome when it's you versus 20 other people, and the idea of overcoming lots of other enemies was definitely something I wanted to include in this project. And also, a bit weirdly, inspired by EA UFC. This was actually the one I ended up basing the combat system on the most, I would say. So after playing around for a while, I developed a system where there would be a left jab, left hook, right hook. And of course the jabs would be quicker with less damage, the hooks would be slower with more damage. Your character being right-handed would do more damage with that hand. I only have a block at the moment and the characters don't attack anyway. I would eventually like to put in a counter system like in Sifu or the Arkham games, but that's just another level of difficulty. I should say that I programmed all of this myself, so it's very janky, but in a way it is good to make something yourself from the ground up. I mentioned Bully before, and there was an option I always like to do is when you grab your opponent and then you can throw them. So I added in a rudimentary grapple system. By the way, this is all very condensed. I spent a really long time working on all of this, so I'm probably not doing it justice, but I'm just cutting out the boring parts so you can have the fun parts. The grapple system is very basic at the moment. There's no real detection of what you're hitting when you throw them, and ultimately I'd like to have some environmental damage. I'm working on that one, but I haven't been able to figure it out just yet. But I would really like a really gruesome like face smash. That is the dream. The AI was another thing that's kind of eluded me. I'm able to make enemies spawn in and chase after you. They can't really attack you just yet, and their movement is just idiotic. But I'm pretty happy with the ragdoll physics, and I've put in some extra effort with the sound design too. It's kind of a weird pet peeve of mine. In a movie or a TV show, when someone gets punched, the sound doesn't sound realistic at all. Maybe it's one of those things where we're used to hearing it a certain way, that we're just used to the way it sounds, whereas in reality it's more of a meaty... If you watch UFC or bare knuckle fighting, or if you're shopping and someone takes the last Easter egg and you beat them to death with your bare hands, and you manage to escape before the police arrive, and they never end up catching you. It's just a completely random example. What was I talking about again? Right, punching people in the face. When you punch someone in the face in the game, the sound will spawn from their face, from whence they were hit. It is a small detail, and I don't even know if you can tell, but I do like to put little details like that in the game. Like an Easter egg, I didn't even mean to do that. I also set up a dialogue system for the enemies, so as you're fighting them they'll randomly shout something at you, and the audio files are actually lip synced. They'll turn their head to look at you and follow you. This all takes quite a lot of time and is quite fiddly, but I do feel like it adds to the game. Also, if they're in the middle of saying something and you punch them, they will stop speaking in the middle of a sentence, which you would, wouldn't you? It is quite fun to have them taunting you and then knocking them out. Overall, I'm pleased with what I've done so far, but there is room for a lot of improvement. Continuing on from what I said earlier, I was really thinking about what this dystopian world would look like. And around this time I made the hub area, which would be a recurring area that you would return to for missions and upgrades and that kind of thing. And I started designing it a while ago. I was slow to get started on it. I left it where it was for quite a long time. But recently I've just developed it into a whole new area. Originally in my head I was thinking something Middle Eastern for the architecture and the general appearance of it. I don't know what it was, but I also became inspired by architectures and rounded arc passageways, which are vaguely European-y, although I'm sure they appear in the Middle East too. I'm not an architect, I just liked the way it looked. And I like the idea that there was this rustic, falling apart structure in what was a high-tech cyberpunk world. I suppose it's like Tatooine in Star Wars. It exemplifies that saying, high-tech, low-life. And as for the tech, I got inspiration from the narrow streets of Japan, bathed in neon lights, but with concrete and dust and sand everywhere. A chaotic environment that is never quiet. And I'm hoping that my footage will show just how much this map has grown and changed over time. I got an idea for one particular section. It's this tiny archway tucked away in the corner of the map, with these quaint little houses. I'm not a great modeler, but I managed to knock together a general shape and use displacement maps and other objects to get something that's kind of close to what I imagined. I also tried experimenting with a day and night cycle. That's still in progress. It's tricky enough to do normally, but when your game has a specific artificial sun and you have to calculate the shape of it and how long it would take to get around, I've definitely made this more tricky for myself. On top of that, there's all the sounds that you would expect from a noisy cyberpunk landscape. Ultimately, I'm thinking of making several of these buildings available to enter, and there would be a mixture of missions, side missions, and just exploration. So a main mission, you'd have to go inside a building, and there could be a random event or a side mission that would lead you to another building. And there'll be other buildings that you could just enter to have a look, maybe even collect some stuff. There are other elements to this map that I will probably include in later videos. But one more thing I wanted to go over in this video is how the character you play ended up here in the first place. Which brings us back to the first video. I'll be going over the new updated story so far. In the first episode I went over the story so far, that being you play as a smuggler and the beginning of the game picks off when a job goes wrong. And I went through quite a lot of changes and iterations, and I've arrived at the point where I am now pretty happy with the outline story. As you know, the game is set in a city in a giant inverted sphere. Towards the northernmost point of the sphere, there is an artificial sun. And relative to this sun, going further down south, we have a layer of what appear to be mountains. They're fairly unexplored, mysterious. Rumour has it this is where the government keeps all of their bases, etc. Although there are parts of it that are declared as tourist destinations. Going further down south, we have luxurious neighbourhoods, home to the most rich, elite, celebrity members of society. Able to look down at the city below, figuratively and literally. A concaved horizon of buildings that fades into the distant smog. Further down south we have our commercial areas, and this contains almost every metropolis vice you can think of. Casinos, shopping malls, freeways, banks, stock exchange, bars, clubs. This is essentially a hub that caters to almost everyone in the city. South from this, you would have a mixture of both lower commercial zones, moderate housing, which gets lower in quality the further down you go. This would be an area where most people in the city live, with quite a diverse range of class. Below this would be the lower class areas, people who are very low down on the social order. This area would be largely lawless, home to gangs, criminals, and people who are just unfortunate enough to live there. High crime rates, starvation, and general depravity. This would be where you spend most of your time in the game. And I took quite a lot of inspiration in trying to build together the life that people in this society would have. I took inspiration from a few George Orwell novels, The Proles from 1984, and the various people described in his memoir Down and Out in Paris and London. Also the Bexhill camp from Children of Men, which I think was in a way inspired by 1984 too, but I really wanted to get inspiration from this whole vibe. But here's the thing, you don't start the game in this area either. There is one level lower, separated by a river of sewage and industrial waste, the furthest point away from the artificial sun. We have what is essentially the base of the city. Here live a society of hard-working people. Their lives are built around extracting and mining resources that help power the city. In exchange for this, they get to live on this land without any outside interference. They're a close-knit group of people where community is very important. With pale, almost grey skin from the lack of sun, physically strong and tough from the amount of labour they do, they live in a different world to the rest of the city. But this wall would soon be broken down, because the current deal where they get to live free on this land in exchange for their work gets altered by the powers that be. They would have to do more work and lose more land. And in addition to that, there are groups within the society who feel like this deal isn't enough. They should get more for their work. They should at least be free to leave and go and live in the main city if they so choose. These requests fall on deaf ears, and in response these groups simply stop working, causing a series of power outages in the city. The government clearly don't like this, and plan to go visit at some point in the future. Now, not to spoil the entire story, but at some point our hero finds himself in the city. Clearly an outsider with no idea how things work. They have to find their way to survive. And with no real skills other than being tougher and stronger than most other people, their opportunities are limited. I'm happy with the story so far. I think it's definitely superior to the smuggler story I started out with. There are some things that I'm not going to reveal straight away, but if you are interested in this project from the first video, then I hope you are just as, if not more, excited about it after watching this one. I'm going to continue working on the game and think about what episode 3 is going to be about whenever that comes out. No idea when, but it does feel good to share what I've made so far, rather than just working in private. I was kind of blown away by the response to the first video. It was by far my most successful video in terms of devlogs, if that's what this is. So if you are watching and enjoying, thank you. And I hope you bear with me as I might not post for a long time, or post something completely random that's nothing to do with anything. In all honesty, I don't know if I'll ever finish this game. There are so many factors and things to think about. But the way I see it, people watching this and enjoying it is probably the next best thing if it didn't work out. So thank you. I never really know how to end these videos, so stay in school, I guess. If you've already finished school, then do something else. Alright, bye.